I have all of mine right here, but before we get into that, if you have anything to plug, let's do that. I have Bastards of the Cosmos, third issue of my comic. Since we're talking about Kirby, it is like 1970s Kirby meets Akira Kurosawa, Persian mythology, Sergio Leone. And I have a new zine, 20-page interview with cartoonist Ken Landgraf. And the coolest thing about this is that the paper is like metal, so if you throw it, you could probably decapitate someone. And there's a lot of Kirby goodness in here, along with letters to Steve Ditko from Ken Landgraf. You can listen to Christopher Calloway's Creator Talks podcast. Just because he's not doing it right now doesn't mean that you just like let those like they're there, you know.
They exist.
Yeah,
they do. Yeah, and I still exist.
Yes. Chris, we're talking about Atlas era monsters, and you know we're kind of talking about a dinosaur monster book today. I was wondering if Devil Dinosaur reminds you of an Atlas era monster, or is he his own thing?
This is a great place to launch because I never felt a big connection to Devil Dinosaur, and I tried to start reading it numerous times and never got past the first issue or two. I think it is a very different feel than the Atlas monsters. During that Atlas period, there was, you know, one or two issue worth of stories that were dinosaurs, but just a very different beast. Devil Dinosaur isn't wearing underpants.
Christopher, were you buying these as they were coming out, or did you get to them later?
No, I bought them as they came out. I was very excited to see them because I was like, oh, I can be on the ground floor of a Kirby issue. Because I always wanted to be on the ground floor of one, because I wasn't starting to read comics when they first came out and at Marvel with a Fantastic Four, and I felt like I missed the bus. So this is my big chance. And I wasn't that into it because I was really into the superheroes at the time. So Jack's Captain America work was exciting to me. It's Black Panther, not so much this. I've enjoyed it more now reading it, especially reading it to my kids. I read it to my oldest, who really was into it, had a lot of questions. And I read it to my youngest for this preparation for this. Wanted to make sure I was on schedule reading them and also to get his input. And he's not as into these things, but I could see why it's different from his other work, because I did some background research on this, and with the cancellation, well, Cap wasn't canceled, but Kirby was taken off of it, or he left it because they wanted to get a script writer for him, because his dialogue was getting kind of clunky, kind of like my speaking, and they needed to get somebody else on there to write the scripts. And Kirby never liked that idea. If he was back at Marvel now, second time, and he was going to write his own stories. So he's like, I'm out of here on this. And then the Eternals got canceled, and we talked about that in the previous show. So then he had to replace it with two other books. So he had Devil Dinosaur, and I think the other one was Machine Man. And it turns out, I didn't realize this, that DC was working on a Commandy cartoon. And of course, it never did see the light of day. We didn't see Commandy until Brave and the Bold came out, that cartoon series, which is really cool. I love that one. So they said, Jack, we need something that we can make into a cartoon. And the answer was Devil Dinosaur. So you can see why this is not like the Atlas Monsters now, given that was the impetus for the book itself.
Adding to that, they wanted to create a property that could compete with a Commandy cartoon, and Commandy being a sort of a primitive place of talking animal creatures, being a Planet of the Apes ripoff, basically. They thought, well, what could compete with that? Well, bigger talking animals, maybe. You know, you picture the reasoning process. Kids like dinosaurs, and wouldn't a kid love to have a pet dinosaur that he or she could ride on the back of? So we'll make, you know, that the story. And I think this is part of the reason it didn't speak to me, is that maybe this is kind of geared toward kids. It's not the adult stuff like superheroes. for myself, I wasn't real big on dinosaurs. I wasn't real big on kids as main characters. And another thing I've never been big on is the stories where the main characters don't talk and we follow them along. And, you know, I'm picturing like Disney stories that follow a cat and dog across the country and stuff. There's something about that style of storytelling where I think I just connect better to the actual characters that are thinking, speaking, interacting with each other by speaking type characters. And I don't know for sure, but I wonder if these are some of the aspects that were a little off-putting for me, tougher to find an entrance into the story.
You know, Devil Dinosaur has the cover date of April 1978, and by this time, he's still doing Cap. He wraps up that series in October. So he's pretty much just wrapping up everything at this point. And Machine Man and Devil Dinosaur, like you said, came out at the same time. So both of them have an April 1978 cover date. But the thing with this, I was on the opposite side for Devil Dinosaur. I kind of wish that they talked less.
I think that would have been a great way to handle it.
Yeah, I love the narration in this book, and there are times when, you know, when people rag on the Stan Lee writing, now because he's dead, people feel brave enough to just like talk shit, but they're like, oh, he writes a lot. And I feel like you get that from Moon Boy a little bit. Like every panel, he feels the need to be like, oh, there's a Stegosaurus over there, and oh no, we're about to die. And you can see that in the artwork. My favorite moments in the book are when they get separated. So they have to rely on their own wits. And over the course of the story, there is actually a little bit of character development where Moon Boy isn't, at the beginning, he's overly reliant on Devil Dinosaur. But over the course of the series, he starts standing up for himself. There's a panel where he beats a guy with a boulder as they're trying to, you know, they're like putting hot wax on Devil Dinosaur's eyes. And, you know, despite this book kind of being a pitch for a kid's cartoon, it's brutal. You know, like the first issue has, it's a flashback of Devil Dinosaur watching his mom and siblings get slaughtered. And like one of them is in a chokehold and they're holding a torch and they're like, I got this one. I don't know. It's not super kid friendly. Again, it's one of those books where I don't know who it's for, or maybe you're 10 years old and you're not paying attention to that. You're talking about Commandy, Christopher, the Brave and the Bold cartoon, which I love. I love that they embrace the campy Silver Age Batman in that series. But while Devil Dinosaur never got its own animated series, decades later, Genndy Tartakovsky decided to do like a rated R version of Devil Dinosaur. So it's, you know, this caveman and a T-Rex, and it's the exact same origin story as Devil Dinosaur. The only difference is that the dinosaur is a mother and he's a father. And first 20 minutes, you have to watch two families get slaughtered, and it's this revenge mission for the rest of it. But Tartakovsky is one of my favorite animators, and this series is absolutely genius in the way it handles it. And it's how I wish the comic handled things. You know, that show takes direct inspiration from this series. Like there are issues that are adapted directly into that show, and they handle it with silence, you know, no dialogue. The main character is a caveman who just grunts, and you get all the context you need from that. But the rest of it is just sound design and soundtrack and animation. And there are just moments that I wish were less dialogue heavy and relied on the visuals. Kirby also covers the dialogue, and he says that they're not speaking English, they're speaking what might be cave speak. I just translated it for you. So he has his little workaround, which I love.
Yeah, even though I guess the genesis of it was, and we'll talk about Genesis too. The genesis was animation. Jack had his own mission with this too. I mean, he wanted to explore ideas, and I think the letters that he wrote, or in the letters page, his little essays, give a lot of insight to what he was trying to point out here. Was that maybe man and dinosaurs did overlap at some point. I mean, there's all these moments in history where they found things like prehistoric sea fish still existing. or sightings of Loch Ness. So who's to say there wasn't some overlap, and who's to say that they didn't coexist in some way where they worked together? Who's to say they weren't more intelligent than we think they were? Because we always had to look at things through our eyes and our intelligence and our level of evolution versus looking at how others, their level of intelligence. So in this book, Devil Dinosaur is pretty clever. I mean, he does some really cool things to defeat his enemies, other dinosaurs, like knocking off parts of a cliff rather than just a straight out fighting and biting each other. So he gives them a little more intelligence. But when my reference to Genesis is, Jack's religious background as being Jewish, you see all these references to Genesis, like the robot machine that created this Eden, basically, and of course there's Eve, and even the giants too, which were also mentioned in Genesis in a couple of verses, and the Book of Enoch, which is not in the Bible, but he's pulling from these various Jewish mythologies and texts to build out some of these characters, even though he's not getting into religion per se. But you see that in the book, which is, he was drawing a lot from his own mythology, his own background, and trying to make a point about, coexistence with dinosaurs, that it could be possible. And I just thought that was really cool, that's the direction that he was taking it.
We didn't get into this with the Eternals, but I see a direct connection. There was a book that came out in 1968, and I might be slaughtering this name, Eric von Däniken. The book was Chariots of the Gods, and it was a pseudoscientific book that pitched the idea that humans in their history couldn't possibly have had the wherewithal to create such things as the pyramids. According to his book, we didn't have the technology, or the Easter Island sculptures, and therefore, since this writer couldn't see how we could possibly do this and didn't know the archaeology, therefore aliens must have come down and given us this technology. And it's an absolute pseudoscience theory that is commonly employed, the god of the gaps, where we don't know what the solution is, so therefore it must be this. And this was an idea that was floating around. It's an idea from 2001, which I believe came out at the same year. So it was an idea kind of in the ether. You can see that Kirby liked this idea, and it spoke to his imagination. And the Eternals is kind of his big story on this topic. And coming out of that, he comes into Devil Dinosaur, and those ideas seep right back in. But interestingly, they don't start seeping in till four issues in or whatever. And getting back to my having trouble getting into this story, once I got to issue 4 and we got into the Kirby zaniness and real zaniness, this became a different series to me. The first 3 stories were pretty much a Might is Right series, and lucky for us, the Might was the good guy, the strongest dinosaur in the land who could put all those bad guys in their place. And you see that story being an important story to Kirby in his life too, with his Jewishness and Hitler, and you hear a lot of stories about how in his life, he'd be at a bar and someone would make a comment, about, oh, Hitler's got the right idea, and he'd punch him out, and so you see a lot of his life and his ideas, kind of themes that he felt in his life coming out in this story series, I feel.
I agree. Issue 3 was where it picked up for me, but for those first few issues, it's kind of meandering. They feel more like one-shots. It's not until 4 through 7 where it starts feeling like a connected story, and he's basing it off of something too. It's not just random ideas. But issue 3, if you guys read the letters, the columns, Issue 3 has one of my favorite columns ever, where he's talking about, and I'm just going to read the quote. I can see this as a legitimate license to give graphic form to honest conjecture. After all, even old wives' tales give some relief from the workday routine to the old wives' contingent. That is, in essence, the role of the comic book and nothing more. With a dash of believability, the reader can share a relationship with fictional people that lasts forever. You would read interviews with him, or you can listen to interviews with him, and he just talks about how he's just there to entertain. You know, despite making biblical allusions, you know, he makes it this big creation myth all of a sudden. You know, it's this boy and his dinosaur. And then all of a sudden he's like, oh yeah, by the way, here's Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. His whole purpose was to entertain. That said, I am glad that it finds a thread 4 issues in. Issue 3 is where it picks up for me. Again, Genndy Tartakovsky's Primal adapts this issue pretty much. There's a scene where it's not a giant, but it's more like a giant ape, and he's wearing the Triceratops, you know, headdress, and it builds up into something. It builds up into a thread, into another creation myth, and then as the series ends, he kind of goes back to the beginning of the series again, where it's more cave people, and he adds some mysticism to it. But I guess my question is, did you guys like the introduction of the sci-fi themes as opposed to focusing on just prehistoric, you know, iconography?
I want to go back to that issue 3. The big surprise of that, you know, this giant has come into the land who's going to be fighting, and actually that to me did feel a little more like the Atlas giant monsters. The big surprise twist at the end is, and this is a twist that popped up in the Atlas giant monsters, the giant monster that's wreaking havoc on the land. It's just a little child who needs to be scolded and snatched back up by his parents and disciplined. And I bring this up because I mentioned I don't tend to like stories with children as the protagonist. And so here we are again. Oh, and now the villain is a child protagonist. And so that once again wasn't the issue that caught me and got me excited. But yeah, then it gets into this mythology with the Kirby take on the Adam and Eve story, and it's total Kirby in my opinion. This idea of what if there is a hint of truth in these old mythologies, and over time our retelling of the story has altered into this something new. This is exactly what he was doing in the Eternals, right? And to me, that was kind of the beginning of, wow, we're getting into something weird, because he introduced aliens who are coming and attacking and annihilating all of the dinosaurs. And I don't know that they're quite humans or apes. I don't know what Moon Boy is exactly, but you know, I was reading this going, oh boy, I did not expect a dinosaur story to go in this direction. And from there, I kind of just took my seatbelt off and let the car throw me where it would. and so that was a lot of fun. And he got even crazier from there with the gorilla dinosaur riding clan, and I thought so much of the visuals in that were just fantastic. And yeah, he just got wackier and wackier, and then a time portal into the future.
Because like, where else are you going to go after that?
Except
I feel like
1978.
if this series kept going, they would have switched brains at some point. So it'd be like them sitting on a table, and it's like, oh no, their minds are melding. It's like, what happened?
Yeah, I was going to say, leading up to issue 4, it seemed like Jack was pulling a lot from King Kong. You know, I mean, you could definitely see, you know, the iguanodon was name used for.
That's Godzilla. That just looks like Godzilla.
Yeah, and at one point where the giant grabs Moon Boy, it looks like King Kong grabbing Fay Ray. So obviously Jack had a lot of fond memories of King Kong, one of his favorite movies. But to me, the series really took off with issue 4, because when I see, the Kirby crackle, I see the machinery, I see the spacesuits. Now we're talking Kirby. And the aliens kind of reminded me in terms of their design of the sleeper that we saw in Captain America Tales of Astonish, that kind of domed head. So that's where the series really took off for me. I felt like there was more I could connect with in terms of Jack's work and the wildness of what he does. And then, of course, the final issue, returning or coming to the present, I thought was great. Although there's no Sparks Nevada. I checked; it's not out here. It doesn't exist. Or not Sparks. It was what was the name of the town it was called? But it was something that doesn't exist.
You're talking about Captain America and Atlas era monsters, and I see Fantastic Four in here too. There was the issue of the infant coming down. It was the same arc. It was just showing up, throwing cars around, zapping people with its weird antenna. And then at the end of the story, it's like, oh, it's this kid just throwing a temper tantrum. So he kind of recycles that stuff. The alien guys, or the robot guys from issue 4, reminded me of the original Punisher. Before Frank Castle, there was like a soup can looking dude with arms and legs that Galactus would send down to just savage people with its, blood, like coiling. It looks like one of those inflatable tube guys at car lots, but made out of metal, and it just beats the hell out of the thing. But yeah, I like how they're ambiguous. You don't even know if there's a human being in there, because there are scenes where there's a great panel, and I forget which, it might be issue 4, where Devil Dinosaur just steps on it and it just says bonk 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 3 times, and then the next panel is just an empty suit, so you don't know what is in there.
And it would get into danger, and then it just like self-destructed, right?
Yeah.
If it got close to death, then it just went pop, basically, and that took care of it. It was some kind of creature or computer device that didn't like the thought of pain, so it would end its existence before it suffered too much.
Yeah. What did you guys think about the introduction of the other characters? What is it? Stone Fist and Gray Hair. I kind of found them, when they first showed up, Jack introduces this, he's like a burly version of Moon Boy, and this old prehistoric guy with a walking stick. And when they showed up, I just rolled my eyes like, oh God, more dialogue. But he makes them work because there's a purpose for them. They show up, they have their arc, and they leave. I was wondering what you guys think about the introduction of more ape-like characters.
It paid off for me in how he went with that story. We're talking about influences. The first couple stories, I'm thinking they remind me of like S.E. Hinton's novels about teen gangs, the Outsiders and stuff. And Jack was raised this way, on the streets, where you had to basically protect yourself, and so you had to be scrappy to survive. And to me, these first couple stories were kind of the caveman equivalent of this. This arc that you're talking about, we've got basically someone who represents the old wise perspective, and another character who represents the scrappy, might is right, fear whoever is different and not in your tribe, and you've got to go to war and protect yourself. And as the story progresses, the two continue that dialogue, right? And then the third character you didn't mention is the female character is introduced to that dynamic, and so it's sort of this microcosm of society to my brain. And the young male and female get imprisoned by the robot, and there is just a great little scene there, to my mind, where the woman is saying, we're provided for here. We've got everything we need. We're living in a paradise. And the male youth is saying, if I can't go wherever I want, I don't want to be here. And I don't care if it is a paradise. So this attitude of what, because I'm picturing cavemen, they're getting eaten by dinosaurs in this world, right? They've got to find food, they've got to find shelter. You picture animals in zoos, and it's like, oh, they're captive. Yeah, but also they have a life expectancy double of what they did in the wild. They've got doctors, and it's kind of an interesting dynamic here. And the way, of course, it is very speaky, very Jack Kirby dialogue heavy. But that was actually one of my favorite big ideas that Jack presented in this whole series.
I saw the same thing, and I kind of wondered, what's the point of Stonehand, because it just seemed like he was a foil for Devil Dinosaur, didn't trust Devil Dinosaur. But then, of course, he turns around and needs his help to break out of that dome, and then he kind of wins him over. And what I found too about Stonehand was that he was kind of man's desire to explore, man's desire to advance and evolve, something like you would see in 2001, because he did not want to be taken care of. He wanted to get out there and fight and not be pent in. He wanted to be free to do whatever he wanted to do. So that to me was kind of man wanting to evolve, wanting to advance versus just being taken care of. So I thought that was an interesting approach to that character that Jack took. At first I thought he was just like the bad guy. Mm-hmm.
From a storytelling point of view, he's a good bad guy. And I'm thinking of Haggard's story She, where there's a villain who's reminding me of this, where whatever the good guy does, the bad guy spins it that no, he's still a bad guy, and he's twisting the narrative, which is something that I think we can relate to in our present day politics.
One of the funniest things about this entire series is the fact that they refer to Devil Dinosaur as devil when there's really no concept of devils and angels. And the whole Adam and Eve thing makes me wonder, so Stonehand and Eve are kind of, and Adam and Eve, they're a version of Adam and Eve. And then when they leave, it's like, well, then we're going to tell our story. And you assume it's kind of like a game of telephone, that eventually they tell that story and then somehow it transforms into the biblical version.
Are we to assume that Devil Dinosaur was the serpent who caused them to be expelled from heaven, in that it was actually a humongous red dinosaur who smashed into this heaven to let them out? I assumed Jack was kind of making these kinds of, you see how the story has changed. Going back to you reading that first, or I guess you didn't read it, Christopher, but that first little paragraph Jack had to say about, so it could have happened, right? That little monkeys rode on the backs of dinosaurs, and this Adam and Eve story. So it could be that, word of mouth was passed down like telephone all these years, and maybe we don't know. So it's possible, just like the Chariots of the Gods book, the God of the Gap, since we don't know, maybe it was a giant red dinosaur who smashed into an alien computer laboratory and released a couple of monkeys.
Yeah, prove it wasn't.
Yeah.
I just love the foil hat version of this history. Like the entire concept of devils was like this giant red dinosaur. Yeah,
I do want to correct one thing.
Go for it
really quick, because I'm going through my notes, and there's probably a spark to Nevada. I don't know what I'm saying. I don't know people screaming at their phone or whatever they're listening on. It's Zuma City that he created, which is like Yuma in Arizona. Yeah. So
don't worry, I'll see those comments. I see those comments.
I know.
For 6 and 7, were there any other editorials or letters pages that you guys remember?
I don't think so. I think they're mostly letters from people that really like the series, but
Yeah.
I don't remember any more editorials that he did. Yeah.
I'm working out of a hardcover, and it showed a couple of the letters pages, and then it kind of stopped after a while.
Mhm.
So I
So
don't know.
I have like pretty much all but the first one. So Marvel like reprinted this, and the cool thing is that they have there are 4 of those dispatches, and I don't know, you know, Chris, like you said, I don't know if they just stopped printing them. So I think it's like 1 through 4 they have the dispatches, and then 5 is the first
Yeah.
letters page.
Yeah.
That's not common from comics back in that era.
Yeah.
That is common, I mean.
Yeah. Yeah. I have the originals, and I have a soft cover
Yeah.
version that has, which is really nice because and probably like the hardcover, it does have all the letters in there in common pages. So, you know, if you don't have the original issues, these do cover all that. So
Jack does his whole tinfoil hat conspiracy arc, biblical conspiracy arc, and then he kind of brings it back again. It's back to what it was at the beginning, so it's more prehistoric. Guys, I call this issue the rope fetishist issue because it's just them. These guys show up. It's like the guys from the beginning, except this time they know how to tie knots, and they tie a lot of knots on Devil Dinosaur. And this issue, out of all of them, is the one that made me think this isn't a kid's cartoon. You know, they're like putting hot wax into Devil Dinosaur's eyes. They're tying him up, and they're, you know, it's extremely brutal. I think this might be one of the most violent comics Jack's done, because normally Jack doesn't do on-screen violence. It's not someone gets shot in the head and you see, you know, brain matter and everything. In this, you see Devil Dinosaur stomping on people's heads. You see stuff that makes you want to call PETA. And I guess with the way he wraps it up, you know, he brings it back to the Dino Riders, and then there's time travel in the last issue. Some of the Kirby books we talked about didn't have endings. They ended. Some of them had more abrupt endings, like OMAC. What did you guys think about the way the series was wrapped up before Jack, you know, packed up his bags and went over and did animation?
It felt to me like it might have been a last minute realization, and they just put the stamp on the canceled stamp on the last panel. But I don't know, Christopher, did you look into the history of that?
Yeah, I'm trying to recall. I know I think Jack was running to the end of his contract with Marvel. He had a 3-year contract, and Stan was saying, well, we'd love to have you continue, but we want you just to do the art, and we'll have somebody else write the dialogue. And that's where Jack was like, no, I'm not doing that. So that's when he went on to animation, you know, and working on storyboarding for Fantastic Four.
It did. The story did. And, you know, it didn't leave a cliffhanger. It ended with Devil and Moon Boy being reunited to be together again. So it did feel complete. Like so many of his stories, it also felt to me like he had 200 other ideas that never got put to paper.
Yeah, I'm glad
the Chronicle, just this
Yes.
really over the top text.
Yeah. Well, at least he got to the present 1978 at the time, because I think that's something people wanted to see at some point. So at least he squeezed that in at the very end.
He could have left Devil there and had Moon Boy go join him, you know, but so in that regard, it does feel like and they lived happily ever after ending, you know, but very quickly, tightly wound up.
Yeah. And the last issue has an ad for some of the shows that Jack worked on. So the new Fantastic Four series is right there as well.
And one of the last things they published of his at Marvel was the cover to Fantastic Four 200, because he did the cover for that. And that was one of the last things on the stands after he left that had his artwork on it. One other thing I want to add, I did not know this until I was going through the trade for this, that the cover of that bondage cover of Devil, it says one of the credits besides Jack is Walter Simonson.
Yes,
And,
Simonson inked Machine Man as well.
Yeah, I didn't know that, because I'm trying to remember where I saw it. I think Walt posted on his social media page that one of the first things he drew was a dinosaur. Is that right? If I recall. And when he signs his name, he signs it like a Stegosaurus. So what a good fit to be on Devil Dinosaur inking that.
I love that. Yeah. Simonson is a big fan of dinosaurs, like you mentioned, and Norse mythology. So it feels like all of his childhood interests just became a way to make money.
Yeah, yeah.
It has an ending. Where else are you going to go? Send him to the future. I love that it's just Devil Dinosaur being confused for 20 pages and people just shooting him. So it's like, it feels like Grand Theft Auto, where all of a sudden, like, you sneeze in someone's general direction and all of a sudden you get 5 stars and helicopters with snipers are coming after you. And it's just like, what did I do?
And talk about a return to the Atlas giant monster stories. This was straight out of them, you know, the fleeing people, the stomping and smashing, turned off initially by the first few stories, and then realized, oh no, this is Kirby, and why didn't he start with this zaniness? And then it ends with my favorite Atlas giant monster fun, and so I wound up being surprised and very satisfied with just the bizarre classic Kirby that was packed into this story, but that surprised me that he found ways to pack it all in based on how he started it all.
I guess just that he did pack a lot into the series, and in one of his essays, he did say this was what he considered the X age, a grab bag for storytellers, and it was a grab bag for him. Yeah. I mean, this could have gone on and on with all the directions that Jack could have taken it. There have been an endless number of stories, but I think it wrapped up well, even though abruptly. And it seems like he had fun with it and went the direction he wanted to go, rather than a vehicle for kids, a kid's cartoon. Because, as you said, some of those issues, especially 7 with the Dino Riders, that was pretty violent. So he did what he wanted to do anyway and told some great stories.
You want to see what eventually became of the Saturday morning cartoon? Go watch Primal. Just nonstop dinosaur slaughter. But yeah, no, it's cool that Devil Dinosaur is still influencing stuff in, you know, ways. And it's one of those books where it didn't get folded into the IP immediately. It's not like Marvel is like, oh boy, let's keep mining Jack for ideas. You know, they waited a few decades to use Devil Dinosaur again. So it wasn't, that ending got to be an ending. It got to be a bookend instead of just being folded into IP immediately.
When you look at Eternals and how resistant he was to trying to make it part of the Marvel universe, you wonder if in his head he's going, they still made me put a couple characters in there. Let's see him try and do that with this new concoction, Devil Dinosaur.
We can wrap it up there. Definitely go check out the other Kirby talks we did. You know, we've talked about, for some reason, we've been talking about most of his Marvel stuff. I know originally we were supposed to be doing Commandia, but that's 40 something issues and none of us have time to sit through and read all of those and condense it into an hour. We talked about Black Panther. We talked about Eternals. OMAC was the last one we did. Go check out the Kerbology talks, but I think we can just wrap it up here. Fighting.
It was fun to get the band back together, guys.
Yes,
Thanks
yeah,
for
this was fun.
another
I really
fun
enjoyed
hour.
it.